Hi, everybody. Thanks for sitting down with us today. We appreciate it. This is Tim Andersen, the Appraiser's Advocate, and we have a guest today that is going to make you think. What Dave says might even make you a little bit mad, but that's okay. One of the purposes of these podcasts is to foment critical thinking. We've got Dave Braun with us. Dave is an appraiser extraordinaire for many years. Dave's an MAI and an SRA, and he's got background in statistics and mathematics, and he's been an expert witness and all the stuff that really makes you up your game to become a great appraiser. Dave, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you, Tim?
Well, doing just fine. We bearded guys have got we bearded old guys have got to stick together.
There you
So
go.
I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Before we get into the meat of this, Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been an appraiser since 1976, and you can tell that by looking at me. You know, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And most of the time, I ran a what would be considered then a large office. We had about 20 appraisers, and I spent a lot of my time uh, trying to make my appraisers' jobs easier. So I did a lot of research and study, and that got me into stuff like statistics. I, I broker a small real estate office as well as do appraisals. Although I haven't done an appraisal in a while, and I may have retired out of appraising. I'm not sure yet. I don't know. Tim, when's the last time you did an appraisal? Are you still active, or if you like me, you kind of phased out of that part of it?
Well, as of this recording, the last appraisal I wrote entirely by myself that I signed was almost 6.5 years ago.
There you
I've
go.
helped some other appraisers write appraisals, but I didn't sign them.
Yeah.
But yeah, last one I did was a condo warehouse about
Yeah.
6.5 years ago.
There you go. So, I've got my SRA and my MAI and those kinds of qualifications. Now, a lot of things I have are X right now. Like right now, I'm an X USPAP certified instructor. I didn't renew this year. I'm an X AI instructor. I didn't renew that again. I called in and thought I'd resign before they fired me for some reason. But at any rate, I've kind of begun to slow down a little bit in that part of the business. And I have spent a good bit of time each year for the last 5 years on, I wouldn't say statistics, but on analysis. And we'll talk more about that analysis versus statistics. But what I'm trying to do now is disseminate information out to the younger appraisers and let them do with as they will. And one of the things I did want to mention, got here somewhere, my book, The Valuation Analyst, I've got a lot of information in that book that has to do with, what is an analysis, and answers a lot of questions. Why is it hard to extract sales? But mostly it's a shield for appraisers because it shows that it's very hard to extract adjustment rates. And it explains why it's hard to extract adjustment rates. And all that's important for appraisers to up their game in analysis. So basically, my story is I want appraisers to be better analysts. And that's probably not so much statistics as they think. We don't use so much. I do think every appraiser, as an exercise, should be able to run a decent regression analysis. Other than that, they probably should know what a residual is and a few other things, but mostly it's up in the game in what we already do. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit, the appraisers' traditional analysis methods. And like you said, some people don't like, I won't say they don't like me. Who could not like me? But
Well, yeah,
what we're,
yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense.
But what we're talking about is, to some people, I represent change, and they think I want to go 100% into statistics, and I absolutely do not. But I do think that appraisers can be better analysts with just a little bit of work. So that's kind of my story.
Now, you were kind enough to send me two papers that you have written recently. One of them is rather lengthy, and the other one is relatively short. Let's talk about the lengthy one first. And we're going to talk about that one generally, but we're going to get into the second one rather in depth. Now, the longer paper, the slightly more scholarly paper, is called An Introduction to the Mutation of Data Records. Now, that's a kind of a dark sounding name. The word mutation brings up uh, genetic engineering, et cetera, but obviously that's not what we're talking about. So why don't you give us an introduction to the mutation of data records?
Okay. When I was writing the book, the valuation analyst.
Yeah, hold it up again so everybody can see
Okay.
it. And then just so
And that
everybody
could be,
knows, at the end of the program, we'll give Dave's email address, and you can get a hold of Dave and order his book.
yeah. Yeah, the book you can get straight on Amazon. Just put in The Valuation Analyst by David Braun and it'll pop up and you can get the book that way. But yeah, then the big paper has to do when I was doing the research on that, I spent a lot of time in spreadsheets and I noticed there were some, you could almost call them number tricks, but I noticed there were some things that with data that you could actually, and we say data, we mean a comparable sale. So for example, you can modify or mutate that data, kind of like what appraisers have heard of, which is data transformation. And I know you're going to show us a little bit about data transformation that you worked on here in a little while, but it's a form of data transformation. It's a little bit different than traditional, but it's designed so that you actually can mutate your data records. You change the numbers a little bit, but they have the same meaning. They contain the same information. And oftentimes, not every time, kind of like data transformation, if you don't need it, you don't do it. But when you need it, it can help. And what it's designed to do is minimize the effect of risk or the effect of randomization in the market of sales prices. You know, when we talk about sales prices, they're randomized in the market. Randomly, the prices are up and down a little bit in every market. No market, everybody pays exactly the exact amount, maybe they should. So when we get our adjustment rates, they're going to be imperfect. You know, when you apply a $120 gross living area adjustment, you don't expect that's going to be the perfect number. It's probably close, we hope. So you can sometimes mutate your data records and it will minimize the effect that using an imperfect adjustment rate will have on the answer. So that's a long story short, and basically probably be easier to read the paper, which we'll put up my email address. But basically, if you email me and just put in the top line, if you'll put in there a white paper, then I'll just reply and send both these papers back to you. That's how you would get it.
And I would, to our listeners, I would recommend you do that. Now, you talked about the transformation of data and changing the numbers, but not changing what they mean. And we will be getting into that. And when we explain that, it will make a lot more sense. And we're not too far away from that. Now, the other paper that you just mentioned is called The Modernization of Appraisal Practice. This is relatively short. It's only 2 pages. And basically, it is calling for appraisers to up their game. Dave, why do you think appraisers need to up their game?
Well, I think the why is the important, and I emphasize analysis. And you know, we've upped our game with electronic measurements, better office management systems, better cameras. There's a lot of things that appraisers have done really well to improve. But when you think about it, most of us don't know any more about the direct sales comparison approach than appraisers did back in the 50s and 60s. So the question is, and I think where sometimes I get misunderstood is, people are afraid I'm kind of using a fear tactic that the sky is falling, and the sky may be falling. In other words, will appraisers just be replaced? And my answer is yes. At some point, appraisers probably will be replaced. I don't know when that will be. It won't be in the next few years. But what I really focus on is when when people when you pay somebody to do something, you expect them to know what they're doing and do the best job they can. And I think that's true of appraisers, that if you can be a little bit better analyst, then why wouldn't you be? That would be the question I would have. It's not really why would you, it's why wouldn't you be? So if you could go to 12 hours of classes and come out and be 10 or 15% better at analysis and understand things better, I guess the question I would have is why wouldn't you do it? Whether you're, whatever reason you would have, I think it's important that we be as good as we can when we go out and charge for our services.
Okay. So you're saying, oh, appraiser, take 10, 12, 20 hours worth of classes one time, and then become 10 or 15% better in what you do for the rest of your career, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. Modernization of appraisal practice, appraisers upping their game. Let me read from the document itself. We quote, "We are not modernizing the valuation process as presented in the Appraisal Institute's principles book. We are seeking to modernize appraisal practice. This includes USPAP, analysis skills, and reporting." Okay. You and I are both USPAP instructors. You were, but we still have that common background. And we both know that USPAP is neither uniform nor standard. So you like that one, huh? Okay. How do we modernize USPAP? How do we modernize analytical skills? How do we modernize reporting?
Well, I think that when you look at USPAP, and we're going to get into number two, which is, we'll go ahead and talk about that because that probably should have been 1A. But some of the confidentiality requirements for an appraiser's opinions are can't really be shared because they're confidential. And I feel like certain items like condition rating, quality rating, maybe highest and best use, there are several things that I would like to not see under that umbrella of being confidential items. I think it goes more against us than it helps the appraisal profession when we're trying to be credible and have people have confidence in our work.
Okay, you and I happen to agree on that, but let me play devil's advocate. Okay, I say the highest and best use isn't what's there. The property, the house ought to be torn down and something else, maybe a newer, larger, more modern house, a house that is more attractive to the current market, should be built in its place. Why should that not be confidential? Because right now it is, but why should that not be confidential?
Well, if you've appraised that house and you know that that's not the highest and best use, another appraiser may pick it up to use it for a comparable sale. And it may be too high, or maybe in this case too low because should be torn down, or maybe the basement should be converted to apartments and it might be too high then. In other words, it probably is not a good comparable for what most appraisers think the residential property should be. So if that was known, or I could tell people that, if I could tell another appraiser that might prevent them from making a mistake when they use that comparable for when they use that house as a comparable. And right now with confidentiality, if I know, Tim, that you're appraising a house and you say, oh, and I'm using this particular house, I couldn't tell you that. I would be that's confidential information that I'm not allowed to give to you.
Okay. Well, that makes sense as far as I'm concerned. And the Appraisal Foundation listens to us very closely, doesn't it?
I have sent my comments in, and I would ask other appraisers that feel that way to do so. But the big reason too, Tim, on that is when we talk about analysis and getting analysis to be more efficient and effective. And what we mean by probably efficient is less steps, which cuts down to less time. So we want our analysis to be more efficient. We also want it to be more effective. We want to give a good opinion, a really good opinion. And having this kind of data out there helps us to be both more efficient and more effective. And that's more efficient because you can get a database. And if a database, a good database was made that 8 or 9 appraisers share, and they know these ratings for condition and quality, and they know if there's a problem with highest and best use and maybe 1 or 2 other things, when it hits the appraiser's desk, they don't have to do what I do now, and probably or what I used to and what other appraisers do. I pull 5 or 6 sales up and I look at the pictures, and then I'm looking for quality and rating clues, and I'm taking 45, 50 minutes to get those. If I had this done, if it was in the database from appraisers that appraise those properties, when I hit a button, it would just come into my work. I could oversee it, make sure nothing looks wrong, but in just seconds, I could apply that data in what I would hope would be a more automated and consistent analysis methods, and I would get a better answer. So just having this information allows us to be more efficient and effective in our appraising. And quite frankly, that's why the secondary market required appraisers to have that rating. They required us to put in the rating for condition and quality. They know they need that in their database. So they have access to this data now. They have taken it and they use it for themselves. And sometimes they run automated valuations on it, but yet the appraiser themselves provided the information. We don't have that information.
That makes sense. Now, let me. Okay, I read 1. We went to 2. This your second point. Your third point is, and we're working our way toward some more sophisticated analytical techniques. But the third one says the profession, meaning appraisers, needs to utilize with the comparison grid in different ways than just the manual line-by-line adjustment process, which requires the analyst to extract each adjustment rate by hand via several possible methods and techniques. Okay, now, rather than that, you're advocating the use of multiple linear regression analysis. Now, talk to us a little bit about that. Why do you advocate this, and why do you think appraisers have historically been so opposed to it?
Okay, so let's talk about that. Now, multiple regression analysis, and the way I'm perceiving it, the approach you want to use depends on the data you have available. So let's say, for example, you're in a very, very rural area. Then regression is not what you want. Regression works when you have a lot of sales and good sales that you can pull in quickly. So actually, when I say we need to use regression, I'm talking about we need to use regression analysis as our databases get better and only in certain markets. So when we can share data that we need, and I can pull 50 sales up and I don't have to look in my MLS at 50 sales to get the qualities of them, in the future, I think we should try to use multiple regression analysis in markets that are very active. So I don't advocate that appraisers should necessarily be using that today, because we don't have the availability of what I call ready data, and we wouldn't use it in rural markets anyway. So really, I think there's 3 things. When we can get that in the future, we can use regression analysis, but it won't be to extract sales. It will just be to use the final value. Now, one of the reasons regression doesn't extract good sales is because of the requirement that the variables be independent of each other. And in real estate, that's not normally true. Usually the bigger lot has a bigger house. The bigger house has more bedrooms, and you have more bedrooms, you have more bathrooms. Housing is dependent. The variables are dependent on each other. So, so sometimes when you try to extract sales and there's too much dependency between them, you get what they call that now collinearity. I'm sorry, I couldn't get it out for a minute. Collinearity. But if you just take the final value, that doesn't matter. So in the future, I'm hoping we'll be able to use regression analysis in active markets as our, if we can get the USPAP folks to let us share this data, and we can bring data in quicker. Then you have an area that's in between. And one of the things I did was I worked on a application that I call tea leaves. It uses 5 cells, and it will work in those intermediate markets. And then in the markets that are very, very rural for residential or mom and pop commercial properties where they don't get many sales, they can't extract a lot of adjustments for mom and pop commercial. Then I also developed an advanced ranking analysis. So I think that's what your 3 types, don't have to be what I developed. Doesn't have to be my regression program that I developed, but or my tea leaves or my ranking, but it needs to be something like that. So you wouldn't do the same analysis for each market area. And in the book I talked about, we discuss market areas and which extraction methods work in different market areas. Now, the second thing, though, that you mentioned or was in this was not our standard adjustment line. I think we get hung up on that too much. And that has to do with reporting too. In the tea leaves, that is actually augmented intelligence, the appraiser supervises it and actually helps it in places. But then for the just sheer number power crunching, when it runs, it may run 100,000 calculations to help the appraiser. But when it's done, it doesn't show the line item adjustment rates. Okay. Now, what I'm thinking is, and Tim, maybe you've been to the doctor lately, and I know you, with your appraiser background, you may do what I do. You go to the doctor and say, my nose is all messed up. And the doctor says, you got a sinus infection. And the doctor says, here's some pills you need to take, finish them up. If they don't work, call me. And the doctor might look at you, Tim, and say, Tim, why aren't you leaving? And you say, well, I'm going to need to see some situations where people like me that are comparable to me took the same medicine and how it affected them and how did it work. I need to see maybe 8 or 10 of those examples. Okay, kind of like a report, almost like an adjustment grid. I need you to show me evidence so I'm convinced what you're doing is right. Now, what is the doctor going to do? Is he going to go make you a 10 or 20 page report with a whole bunch of comparable patients on it?
No, he's going to throw you out.
Yeah, they don't do that. When you go into a lawyer and you ask for advice and then they give you advice and you say, well, I need you to write up, like maybe 3 to 6 cases of people that came in with the same problem that I've got. And what you recommended, what happened, were they successful or did it fail? So I can see if your advice is good. The lawyer can't do that. So part of the reason that if we're ever bypassed, one of the reasons is going to be because not just our fees, it's going to be our turn time. But if doctors had to do that, they couldn't do but a few patients a day and lawyers' clients. But we're expected to try to do it fast, and we're trying to itemize and prove everything that we do to people. Itemize everything that we've done in our report. So at some point, reporting may have to give a little bit. Now, with a product like the tea leaf, once everybody uses it and knows how it works and trusts it, there may be no point in showing all those individual adjustments. And it doesn't even work completely on adjustment. It works 4 or 5 ways, but some of the ways is just matching stuff together. So I don't think we want in the future to have to give these big reports. Now I know in mortgage work, we do more report. For individuals, we can do the restricted reports and we can do a little bit less work like this. But normally to get the answer, we still have to have it in our work files. So I'm advocating we get away from having to have every line item adjustment anyway in the future. That's what I would envision for these younger appraisers that are in the business, that they would be able to have that you and I didn't have as they come up and able to work faster and make more impact because they can do more assignments.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is the future as you envision it, or perhaps as you wish it would be the appraiser is going to put data into a program, and the program is going to manipulate the data insofar as it can. I mean, it depends on the quality of the data you put in. But assuming that you had indeed 50 sales, which is sometimes possible and sometimes not, then a great big old long nasty report, when you've got plenty of comparable data, really isn't necessary. It might be when you don't, but when you've got plenty of data that explain the variables, you really don't need a big long nasty report, and you certainly don't need to describe the bathroom wainscot.
Yeah, there's no need. And you know, if you had 50 sales, then I'd recommend that you would use regression, multiple linear regression analysis if you have those kind of sales. And then you would just take the answer that it gives you. You wouldn't worry about the adjustment rates.
Okay. Now I'm gonna bring up on the screen, I hope, the something that we're going to look at from a standpoint of efficiency. And we're going to go down here. Now, Dave, I'm going to set the stage, and then I'm going to ask you to explain what we've got. This column over here is site size. These happen to be acres. This column is the sales price per acre. In other words, as the properties get bigger, the sales price per acre drops. The grid itself shows this relationship. The blue line is the exponential curve, whereas the red line is just a simple straight line regression analysis, very basic, as you can see by this very basic formula up here. Now, in this particular analysis, which we're going to look at again, but in a bit of a different light in just a couple of minutes, what we're saying is, okay, we got the acreage, we got the sales price per acre, but there's only about a 65% correlation in this particular grouping of data. Dave, talk to us about 65% correlation. Is that particularly good or bad or indifferent or what?
That's not too good. And the two lines demonstrate that. And what we've got here is a situation of a diminishing rate of return. As you buy more acreage, the price per acre falls. And that's a common situation in property appraising, whether it's housing, you know, at some point, almost any type of property can see some type of diminishing rate of return. In most areas, you see that in acreage, and that assumes you can't divide it. And what you see is the blue line. Let's go. And the question was, what would the value be at 80 acres? So if you go to the 80 at the bottom of the chart, Tim, do you see those? There you go. And you go up to the blue line, you see the real answer would be about 8,000 an acre. And if you go over to the left, you see it's about 8 and from the data. But if you're not handling the diminishing rate of return and you just do a straight line regression analysis, then at $80, you're going to go up to the red line there, yes, and you're going to be too high. I see you've got 15 below. Is it 15? No, it won't be 15, but it'll be maybe 12-ish, maybe 12,000. It looks like if you go to the left there, it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be more like 12. So you're going to be too high. Now this is a statistical technique called data transformation. And the reason I introduced this in the paper and what we're going to see here is that when I say something like mutate the data records or change the data records, everybody goes, we can't do that. But it's been done in statistics and mathematics all the time. And here's a perfect example of where you might modify the data. So now, Tim, take us up to the top and let's see a new way to look at this. And that is, we would use I think we used what? The log of, where's the logs, Tim, that you put in for me?
Right there.
That's the log of the X, which was the acreage.
Okay, what we need to do is explain what log means. And I think I can break it down pretty well. We know that 10 times 10 is 100. Therefore, 10 squared is 100. The square root of 100 is 10. The log of 100 is 2. In other words, the log is the exponent. You have to raise a number 2 to end up with another number. So what we've got here is if you take 10 and raise it to an exponent of 0.6990, you end up with 5. Now, what we're doing here is by putting these logs, see, when we go down here, you know, there's a lot of difference between these, where there isn't so much difference between these. So while we're keeping the same number, what we're doing is we're mashing them together so that analysis of them is a little bit easier. There's no reason to get excited about how to calculate a log because the computer does that for you. And there's how you do it. Log of that number, and then you hit enter and it gives you the log. So the math behind it is very simple.
Yeah, and that's Tim. That's why you have an MBA behind your name and I don't. See, you asked me how. That's the good news for appraisers. They don't always have to know it that deep, as long as they know to use the log. And like you say, Excel's got a very easy function for it. So that's the good news for the rest of the world. You know.
Yeah, it would be too difficult. Well, it wouldn't be difficult, but it's too time consuming to do this by hand. So you let the computer do it. And by the way, Dave, I don't have an MBA. I do have a master's degree, but it's not
Master's.
an MBA.
Yeah, master's. Okay.
All right. Now,
I guess there's a difference, but
a little bit.
But I still think you probably did a little work to get that. So
yeah, I did thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a wonderful experience. All right. So what we've got here is we've got the 2 lines. We got the red line and we got the blue line. Now let me go.
The blue lines plotted with the logs, not the regular acreage.
Right. Now let's go back down here. Remember when we said that an 80,000 acre, or excuse me, an 80 acre site should come in at about $8,000 an acre? Well, when we do the math down here, which is just this formula right here, all we did was fill it in. So it's minus $122.53, and it's minus because the chart goes down to the right, times the acreage plus this fudge factor. And we're not going to go into why it's there. It just is. The computer does that. But this says it ought to be $15,000, almost $16,000 an acre, almost twice what it really should be. But when we come up here and we do the log instead of the actual acreage, we do the log of the acreage, you'll notice that there isn't that much difference between the 2 curves. And if you just eyeball, I assume 45 acres just for grins and giggles. If you come up here and then go over to here, you know it's going to be a little bit more than $10,000 an acre. We don't really know how much, but it's got to be a little bit more than $10,000 an acre. Well, here's the math. And all we did was we just followed that formula right there. The X is the log. Okay. So we come over here and we do all the math. And then this says that a 45 acre site ought to have a value of between 11.5 and 12. And we got something that's over $10,000. So they're a little off, but they're a whole lot closer than that one. And this, Dave, I think is what you mean by more efficient. This gets us to a narrower range a whole lot faster than this, in which there would probably be a lot of guessing involved, which we want to avoid.
Yeah. Also, it primarily effective too, because it gets you to the more correct answer. If you didn't do that on some of those, you would get the wrong, a bigger error.
Yeah.
And, for those that aren't following all this detail, the main thing is to see when we did transformation to the data, the blue line is closer to the red line.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big point.
Mm-hmm.
That it made it better, so that when you use this approach to find the value, then which is an approach that relies, or a method that relies on linearity, then it's going to be more accurate. And by manipulating the data, you are going to get a more accurate answer. So that's the main thing.
And by manipulating the data, you don't mean manipulate in the sense of, or in the negative sense. We just took five acres and turned that into a log.
Yeah.
Through the at log function in Excel, and then compared the log functions to the sales price per acre, and got a much higher level of correspondence. In other words, we went from coefficient of 67% to coefficient of 94%. And I don't care what you're doing, when you got a 94% correlation, what that means is this curve explains 94% of the difference in sales prices, whereas down here it explains only 65%. So we've narrowed the range by approximately 50%, which means this is probably going to give us a better idea and faster of what the property is worth than would this.
Right.
Because then we'd have to explain, well, you say, well, it should be $8,000 an acre, but oh, look, it's 15. We have to explain it away. Whereas down here, we say, look, 11,877. Okay, there's probably some noise in there, but the range is probably between 11 and 12. And by narrowing that range, we have made ourselves more efficient because we have less difference to explain, as well as less difference to explain away. And I think that's what you're talking about, Dave, when you talk about efficiency.
Right. And then this leads into a different type of manipulating data, or transformation of data, that I call data mutation. And it plays largely, and like I say, people can get that paper from me, but it plays largely on if you believe the principle that a property that requires less adjustments is probably the comp you would rather use than a property that requires more adjustments, then it sounds almost too good to be true. But there's times that you can mutate your data and make it more similar to the subject. There's times that if you believe, for example, in the principle that bracketing is good, and it is. Let me tell you, I've proven it statistically, and I used it for years in appraising. And bracketing is a wonderful thing to do. And if you believe that, there's times when your data just won't let you bracket it. But if you mutate data, you change it a little bit, what the mutation of data records will allow you to do is possibly be able to bracket when you couldn't have the original data. So the whole theory in that the new data you make contains the same information as the other data. And that's made clear in the paper how it works. And this is something that appraisers aren't going to jump on and use today or tomorrow, but it does open a lot of doors, and it's simple math. It's nothing hard. Like to mutate a data record, you might take one data record and multiply everything, all of the variables, by 2. And maybe, Tim, after a few months, we'll come back and look at that more closely in a podcast.
Oh, no, we will.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We've opened that door. Now we got to walk through it. Yeah.
But the math works, and how useful it will be to appraisers, it's not going to change anything today or tomorrow, but there may be ways to use it in the future that will knock, when you ask the question, how accurate, should an appraisal be? And a lot of people end up saying, well, probably within 5% is what we hope. And I wouldn't argue with that. Of course, you can't be more accurate than the market itself. So, but I wouldn't argue with that. But let's say it's 5%. So if you can use a technique that'll get you to 3.5% all the time, I would use that technique. That's a lot of change to be not accurate, to be a 5% accuracy to a 3.5%. That's just 1.5%. These kinds of things I'm talking about aren't going to hit the perfect number, but it's ways that we can use data transformation to be a little bit better. But by and large, I think that appraisers just need to be better analysts. And the other thing that I would say is appraisers as a whole, as a group, should not be waiting for other people to tell us how to do stuff. You remember the 1004 MC form. Now, there was nothing necessarily terribly wrong with that form. A lot of people hated it, but basically we didn't invent a form. We didn't design anything for that kind of analysis. So then the users of the appraisals did it for us. So what I'm saying is appraisers should start thinking about what things that work for appraisers, what things work with the adjustment grid, what things work with the direct comparison approach. And we should keep learning ourselves and promoting things that work rather than just sitting and waiting until the users say, here's what you will use. You will use this method and that's that. And so I'm terribly against that. I think we should continue to evolve and develop ourselves as a profession.
Dave, thank you. I was going to make a snotty remark about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but I'll avoid that. Um, Dave, you and I met personally about 3 years ago in Nashville at a convention. Nobody's been able to have conventions in the last year, effectively. Are you going to be speaking anywhere, or teaching anywhere, or appearing anywhere that someone could come and hear you speak and meet with you and ask you questions about your book?
Yeah, nothing's really scheduled. No, what, I just hope to keep putting out information, and that's not to say that there won't be a conference that, even if it's through Zoom like we're doing, that I won't be involved in it. I'm certainly wanting to pass what little bit of information I have to other appraisers that want it and need it, so they can begin to work to continue to shape the profession the way that the younger appraisers think it should be. So I don't have anything scheduled right now.
And let's see, would you give us your email address again, please?
Okay, it's David Braun, and that's Braun Properties. So David Braun Properties, and properties is IES at gmail.com.
David Braun Properties at gmail.com. Okay, excellent. Dave, as we get close to wrapping this up, you indicated that someone could buy your book by going straight to Amazon. Okay. You published an earlier version of that book, which I have and thoroughly enjoyed reading. I thought it was extremely clear and well presented. I appreciate your willingness to be an iconoclast and tell the emperor in many cases that he is buck-ass naked. That is absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story of why I think that sometimes appraisers just get so busy. Part of the reason appraisers don't change is, one, we're all adverse to change. The other reason is we're just busy and we don't have time to do it. And appraisers speak their own jargon, and we don't know how sometimes we get so much into our own jargon, extracting sales and the way we do things and direct sales comparison, we forget how to talk to other people. So I want to tell you a story about two hunters in the woods, and they've walked quite a ways, and they go up a pretty steep hill. And the hunter in front, he's the older hunter. And in a minute, he drops his gun, he spins around, and he grabs his chest, and he tries to breathe, but he can't, and he just falls to the ground. And the younger one runs up and looks at him, and he's not breathing, nothing's happening. And so he immediately whips out his cell phone. He calls 911. He says, I'm out in the woods, and he's in a panic. I'm out in the woods, my partners fell down, and the person on the other end, the emergency person's trained to calm them down. There's no help, in the field if they're not calm. Said, calm down, sir, calm down. First thing I need you to do is be sure that he's dead. So the emergency hunter's listening and hears a loud shot over the phone. And then he comes back and says, now what do I do? So we don't want to get like the hunters to where we don't understand how everybody else talks. So I think that one thing that the profession needs to do is understand we should be able to communicate with lenders. We should be able to communicate with individuals, and we should be able to communicate with each other. And that when the jargon gets too hard, we just talk English. we just talk English sometimes. So that I would recommend that. But Tim, I'm telling you, I really appreciate that you have let me come on and tell my story a little bit, because I don't know how much more of this type of research I'll be doing in the future. And so I just want the other appraisers to know about it.
Well, Dave, I've read your stuff, and you're providing a great service to appraisers by waving the flag and saying, "Here, look, there are other ways to do things, and there are other tools to put in your toolkit. You got to learn how to use them, and you may not use them all the time, but there are other tools, and some of them are really helpful in some instances." And
Right.
it's something that I've tried to do in my professional career. But I'm grateful for people of your stature and your experience and your training, who's waving that flag and standing on that podium, saying, "Hey, the opportunity's here. Please take advantage of it." And that's why I asked about speaking. Because you get usually 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes, and you can make an excellent presentation, as well as an excellent point supporting your thesis. And your speech in Nashville, the one the NAA meeting, the AX meeting in which we met, I thought the presentation was excellent. I thought it was very clear, very precise. And I know a number of appraisers spoke with you after the meeting about some of the things that you had said, some of your publications, etc. Well, Dave, again, thank you. It's an honor to sit down with someone who has so much wisdom and knowledge and learn from them on a one-to-one basis. So thank you. As we record this, it's the end of December 2020. So please let me wish you a happy new year. And with any luck at all, we'll get to see each other at a convention sometime this year. I look forward to the next time we get to shake hands.
All right. Thank you, Tim.
They appreciate it. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks for stopping in to listen. I appreciate it very much.